There are moments in life when the world tells you it cannot be done, when every door shuts, every prayer seems unanswered, and every hand you once trusted withdraws in silence. It is in those moments that heaven begins its quiet work. You see, God does not call the qualified, He qualifies the called. And when He chooses you, He often does so in the middle of your confusion, when your strength is gone and your faith feels like a whisper barely holding on. Because He does not need your power, He only needs your willingness. When God uses you to do the impossible, it rarely begins with applause. It begins with impossibility. He places you in situations that defy logic, where human effort collapses and reason has no explanation. It is there, in that sacred gap between your limit and His limitless power, that the divine exchange happens. The very thing you thought was your downfall becomes the tool of your destiny. You become the evidence that God still moves through ordinary people to perform extraordinary wonders. Every miracle in Scripture began with a human impossibility. The Red Sea did not part because of human skill. It parted because a trembling man lifted his staff in obedience. The walls of Jericho didn't fall by strategy, but by faith that dared to march around silence. The virgin birth did not occur through human reason, but divine intention. God delights in defying natural order, so the world may know that the impossible bows before Him. And when He chooses to do it through you, it's not because you are strong, it's because you are surrendered. There will be seasons when you look at yourself and see nothing special. You will question why God would pick someone like you, flawed, fearful, fragile. Yet that is precisely the kind of person He loves to use. For your weakness is the stage upon which His strength performs. He takes your insecurity and turns it into inspiration, your past wounds into wisdom, your brokenness into beauty. The impossible becomes possible when your I can't becomes God can. The enemy wants you to believe that your limitations define you, but God uses those very limitations to reveal Himself through you. Every obstacle in your path is not proof that you are disqualified, it's proof that you're chosen. For the greater the impossibility, the greater the glory that follows. He did not bring you this far to leave you halfway. What looks like the end of your capacity is the beginning of His capability. If you trace the journey of every person God has used, you will see the same pattern. He took a stuttering man to confront kings. He used a shepherd boy to defeat a giant. He transformed a persecutor into a preacher. He turned a fisherman into a founder of the faith. None of them were perfect. All of them were chosen, and every one of them had to walk through an impossible season to reveal a possible God. When God uses you to do the impossible, it changes how you see everything. You stop measuring situations by their difficulty and start measuring them by His ability. You stop saying it's too big and start declaring my God is bigger. You begin to understand that impossibility is not a wall, it's a doorway that only faith can open. And sometimes the reason God allows the odds to be stacked against you is so that when victory comes, no one, not even you, can take credit for it. So if you are standing before a mountain that refuses to move, remember this: you are standing at the very place where miracles begin. You were not chosen because you had all the answers. You were chosen because you dared to believe. God has already written a story through your life that others will read as proof that the impossible is possible. You are the vessel through which He reveals His power. And though the path may be uncertain, the outcome is already sealed in victory. Faith is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to move forward despite it. When God says, I will use you, He is not asking you to perform, He is asking you to trust. The miracle does not depend on your strength, but your surrender. Every yes you give him echoes through eternity, shaking the boundaries of what the world calls impossible. And one day, when you look back, you will realize something profound. You were not just part of a miracle. You were the miracle. You were the answer to someone's prayer, the vessel through which God demonstrated his glory, the living testimony that nothing is too hard for him. So, keep walking in faith. Keep believing even when you cannot see. Because when it's all said and done, you will stand in awe of what God has done through you. And the world will know it wasn't you who did the impossible. It was God working through you to remind creation that the impossible still bends before his will. When God chooses you, he rarely begins with comfort. He begins with emptiness. It is the divine paradox. Before he fills you, he must first make space within you. Before he trusts you with his greatness, he strips you of what you thought you needed to survive. You see, we often assume that divine calling begins with abundance, that God uses those who have everything figured out, those who possess unshakable confidence, endless resources, and a flawless plan. But that is not the nature of heaven. God specializes in choosing the least likely, the overlooked, the ones others have already written off. He does not begin with the powerful. He begins with the surrendered. There comes a season when the people you once depended on begin to disappear. Opportunities that once seemed certain begin to crumble. You start to wonder if you've done something wrong, but in truth, God is not punishing you. He is positioning you. Every closed door, every unanswered call, every betrayal has been part of a sacred orchestration. He is removing your false sources of strength because he knows they cannot carry you into the realm of the impossible. The places you once sought comfort are now quiet, and the arms you once trusted are no longer there. That silence, though painful, is the language of divine preparation. Think of Moses in the desert. He once walked as a prince in Pharaoh's palace, confident and influential. But God could not use that version of Moses to part seas and challenge kings. The man who would confront Pharaoh had to first be broken by solitude. He had to learn to hear God's voice in the wilderness before he could speak with authority in Egypt. The wilderness was not a punishment. It was purification. God was stripping away every title, every connection, every illusion of self-sufficiency. And when Moses finally stood before Pharaoh, his power did not come from status, but from surrender. That is how God works with those he intends to use for the impossible. He will take you through seasons that feel like subtraction, but in truth, he is multiplying your spiritual depth. You may lose people, opportunities, or possessions, but what you gain is divine alignment. He removes your dependence on what is temporary, so you can rely entirely on what is eternal. When the applause fades and no one sees your struggle, heaven still watches. God is shaping your heart to withstand the weight of the miracle he is about to release. We often cry for deliverance when God is still preparing us for it. But he knows that blessings given too early can destroy a person not yet anchored in faith. That's why he breaks your pride before he gives you power. He teaches you how to kneel before he allows you to stand tall. He lets the world misunderstand you, so that you learn that validation from men is nothing compared to approval from him. The isolation that once felt unbearable begins to reveal itself as sacred, a holy classroom where you learn that you and God are enough. There is beauty in the breaking. When God empties your hands, it is not to leave you barren, it is to fill you with what cannot be taken away. The strength you gain in those hidden years will sustain you when the impossible finally happens. You will realize that the people who left were never meant to stand beside your miracle, for they would have tried to share credit for what only God could do. That is why he isolates you before he elevates you, so that when he moves, no one can claim it was human ability that made it possible. In those silent nights of uncertainty, when prayers seem to echo back unanswered, know this: heaven is not ignoring you. Heaven is instructing you. You are being trained in faith, molded in patience, and refined in trust. Every tear that fell in your solitude has been recorded by God himself. Not one moment of your pain has been wasted. The same God who allowed the storm is preparing you to command it one day. When the miracle finally arrives, you will see why it had to happen this way. The hands that once trembled will lift in gratitude, and the heart that once feared will recognize divine intention. You will no longer resent the stripping, you will thank God for it, because without that season of emptiness, you would have mistaken your strength for his. You will stand not as one who achieved the impossible, but as one through whom the impossible was achieved. And in that moment, when the world sees your victory, your soul will quietly whisper, "It was never me, it was always him." God often hides his greatest works behind ordinary acts of obedience. That is his mystery, that the extraordinary is often disguised in simplicity. When he decides to do the impossible through you, it doesn't come with thunder or a grand announcement. It begins quietly in the still corners of your daily life, through small decisions that test your willingness more than your wisdom. The world looks for miracles in flashes of glory, but heaven plants them in moments of obedience that seem almost insignificant. You may not even realize when you are standing on sacred ground. You may think you are simply doing what must be done, showing kindness, taking a risk, forgiving someone undeserving, or trusting when it makes no sense. Yet those very moments are the ones heaven uses to alter destinies. God rarely asks you to perform miracles. He asks you to take a single step of faith. The sea did not part until Moses lifted his staff. The water did not turn to wine until the servants filled the jars. The man with the withered hand was not healed until he stretched it out. Obedience was the key that unlocked the impossible. We live in an age that worships results. We want to see proof before we act, to be certain before we move. But God's way is different. He asks for obedience before evidence. He calls you to trust before you can see the path. The miracle in his eyes is not the outcome. It's your willingness to move when there's no guarantee of success. He does not need your perfection. He needs your participation, because when you obey in faith, you create a space where divine power can flow freely. The danger is that obedience often feels too simple. It lacks the grandeur we associate with greatness. Yet that is the test, whether you will still obey when no one notices, when no one applauds, when your faith feels invisible. God hides his greatest treasures in such moments because he wants you to act from love, not from the desire for recognition. True obedience is not about being seen, it's about being faithful when unseen. Think of Noah building the ark under clear skies. Every hammer strike was an act of trust. The people laughed, the world doubted, yet Noah obeyed because God spoke. That obedience changed human history. Imagine the faith it took for Abraham to leave everything familiar, or for Peter to cast his net one more time after a night of failure. Each of them could have reasoned their way out of the command, but they didn't. They acted, and when they did, heaven responded. God is not looking for those who can understand his every move. He is searching for those who will obey without full understanding, because obedience reveals trust, and trust is the soil in which miracles grow. You may be praying for God to move, but often he is waiting for you to make the first move. The command may seem small: forgive, give, go, wait, speak, or stay silent, but your response determines whether heaven will open over your life. There will be moments when obedience feels like walking blindfolded through uncertainty. The road will be dim, and fear will whisper that you're making a mistake. But every step of obedience carves a path for God's hand to move. Each time you say yes to Him, even trembling, you build an invisible bridge between the natural and the divine. The impossible doesn't happen when you feel ready. It happens when you are willing. And yet, this is the beauty of obedience. It transforms you even before it changes your circumstances. Each act of faith strengthens your spirit, sharpens your discernment, and aligns your heart with God's rhythm. What once felt like blind trust becomes your greatest source of confidence, because you've seen how obedience unlocks blessings no amount of logic could produce. One day you'll look back and realize that what you thought were small, meaningless steps were actually divine instructions leading you into destiny. You'll see that every yes mattered, every sacrifice, every quiet prayer, every moment you chose faith over fear. You'll understand that the impossible was not achieved in a single moment of glory, but through 1,000 unseen acts of obedience that heaven recorded and honored. And in that revelation you'll find peace, because you will know that obedience is never wasted. The God who called you to step out is faithful to meet you on the path, and even when your obedience seems unnoticed by the world, heaven rejoices, for through your surrender, the impossible becomes possible, and the divine will of God is fulfilled upon the earth. Every impossibility you face is an invitation to witness the character of God. When life closes in around you, when every plan crumbles and every strength fails, it is not a sign that God has abandoned you. It is a summons to see Him more clearly. The human heart longs for ease, but the divine heart longs for revelation. God is not as interested in making you comfortable as He is in making you aware of who He is, what He can do, and how deeply He walks beside you in the darkness you wish to escape. It is within the boundaries of the impossible that God's personality is revealed. In comfort you know His goodness. In struggle you discover His depth. You learn that He is not just the God of abundance, but also the God of endurance. Not only the one who blesses, but the one who sustains. You come to realize that the same hand that gives also holds. The same voice that commands storms to cease is the one that whispers peace into your trembling soul. We often ask, why would a loving God allow this? But if every prayer were instantly answered, if every battle were easily won, faith would have no reason to exist. Faith cannot grow in the absence of impossibility. It needs resistance to reveal its strength. You do not discover the weight of His promises when life is light. You discover it when everything feels unbearably heavy. That is when the eternal steps into the temporary. When heaven invades your despair to show that nothing, absolutely nothing, is beyond His reach. When you face the impossible, you are standing on holy ground, though it may not feel that way. The same God who allowed the Red Sea to trap His people between water and war did so that they might learn His nature, not His methods, but His nature, because His methods change, but His nature never does. You cannot predict how He will move, but you can trust that He will. Every impossibility is God's invitation for you to let go of your strategies and cling to His sovereignty. The truth is, we do not truly see God in moments of ease. We know about Him then, but we come to know Him when everything else fails, when health fades, when people walk away, when dreams collapse. That's when His presence becomes more tangible than your pain. That's when He reveals Himself not as a distant deity, but as an intimate companion. He meets you in the ashes, not to explain the fire, but to show that He still reigns over it. The impossible is His canvas, and your life is the artwork through which he paints his faithfulness. Think of how the greatest revelations in history came from the hardest trials. Daniel did not encounter divine protection until he was thrown into the lion's den. The 3 Hebrew men did not see the 4th figure in the fire until they stepped into the furnace. Lazarus did not experience resurrection until death had already claimed him. God does not reveal his power in the absence of problems. He reveals it through them. The greater the impossibility, the greater the display of who he is. And sometimes the miracle is not in the removal of the problem, but in the transformation of your perspective. God may not change your circumstance immediately because he's changing you through it. He is teaching you to see his hand when you cannot trace his plan. You begin to notice small evidences of his care, the strength to endure another day, the unexpected word that brings hope, the peace that arrives uninvited in the middle of chaos. These are not coincidences. They are glimpses of his character, shining through the cracks of your impossibility. You will find that every trial has a purpose deeper than pain. What seems like an obstacle is often a revelation disguised as hardship. The mountain that stands before you is not just there to block your path. It's there to show you that God can move what you never thought could move. Every impossibility is a mirror reflecting back not your weakness, but his glory. And when the storm passes, and it will, you will no longer see him the way you did before. You will speak of him not from borrowed belief, but from personal encounter. You will say, I have seen his faithfulness. I have felt his mercy. I have walked through fire and found him there. The impossible is not a punishment. It is a passage, a sacred invitation for heaven to prove that it is real. So when you stand at the edge of what you cannot fix, remember, you are standing at the doorway of divine revelation. This is not the end. This is the unveiling. What terrifies you today will one day be your testimony. Because the impossible was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to reveal the God who never fails. When God uses you to do what cannot be done, you are not the same person who began the journey. The miracle may happen around you, but the true transformation happens within you. People will see the outcome, the healed wound, the opened door, the breakthrough that defied reason, but they will not see the invisible change in your soul. For when heaven touches your life, it alters the very rhythm of your being. You begin to walk differently, think differently, and love differently. The impossible does not just happen through you, it happens to you. When God decides to perform the miraculous through a human vessel, he does not simply use that person. He reshapes them. He takes the ordinary heart and breathes eternity into it. He enlarges the capacity to trust, to endure, to believe. Before you were ever the channel through which his power flowed, you were the clay upon which his hands worked. He softens your pride with pain, tempers your will with waiting, and refines your faith with fire. You may pray for a miracle, but he answers with transformation, because the greater miracle is not what you see, but what you become. In the beginning, you may think that God is asking too much of you. You may cry, "Why me, Lord? Why must I go through this?" But by the end, when the dust settles and the impossible becomes reality, you will understand. You will see that he chose you not because you were strong, but because you were willing. The process that seemed unbearable was the very forge where your soul was remade. You entered the fire trembling, but you emerged radiant, your spirit echoing with the truth that only those who have been broken can truly be used. God cannot fill a vessel that refuses to be emptied. So he allows your plans to crumble, your strength to fail, and your ego to shatter, because in the ruins of your control, he builds his glory. When the impossible finally happens, You realize it was never about achieving something impressive. It was about learning dependence. You see, he could have done it without you, but he chose to do it through you so that your heart would learn the language of humility, and that humility becomes the foundation for divine partnership. Think of Peter. The man who once sank in fear became the one who walked upon the storm. The same fisherman who once denied Christ became the rock upon which the church was built. What changed? Not his talent, but his understanding. The impossible taught him that faith is not the absence of weakness, it is the willingness to trust despite it. Through failure he found grace. Through surrender he found strength. That is the mystery of transformation. You think you are losing everything, but in truth you are becoming everything God intended. And transformation leaves a mark. Once God uses you, you can never go back to being ordinary. Your eyes see differently. You begin to notice divine fingerprints on things you once ignored. You start to move slower, speak softer, forgive quicker. The battles that used to frighten you no longer shake you, because you've seen what God can do when all seems lost. The impossible becomes your testimony, and your faith becomes a living map for those still wandering in disbelief. The transformation is not just spiritual, it is deeply human. You begin to love more deeply because you've been held by love itself. You show compassion to others because you remember how mercy carried you. You no longer need to convince anyone of God's power. Your very presence becomes proof of it. The peace you carry is not borrowed. It has been born out of pain, out of waiting, out of trust. And perhaps that is the greatest secret of divine transformation. God uses the impossible not only to display his might, but to make you more like himself. Each trial chisels away your fear and reveals his image within you. What once made you anxious now anchors you in faith. What once broke you now builds you. The impossible was never about the miracle itself. It was about shaping your soul to mirror the one who performs it. So when the miracle comes, remember, it did not just happen for you, it happened in you. You are not the same person who prayed at the beginning of the storm. You are stronger, quieter, deeper. The world may call it success, but heaven calls it transformation. For while others see only what you achieved, God sees what you became, the living reflection of his grace, molded by impossibility, perfected by surrender, and prepared for even greater things to come. The impossible does not end with you, it flows through you. When God performs a miracle in your life, he is not only blessing you, he is establishing a testimony. What he does for you is meant to reach far beyond you. The miracle becomes a current, flowing from your life into the lives of others. You become a vessel through which his power continues to move, long after your tears have dried and your prayers have been answered. What began as your private struggle becomes someone else's public encouragement. The moment you thought was meant to break you becomes the very story that heals another. This is the hidden beauty of divine intervention. It never stops with the receiver. When God chooses to do the impossible through you, it is not for your glory, but for his light to be carried onward. The transformation you experience is contagious. Your survival becomes someone else's hope. Your faith becomes the spark that ignites another's belief. You become a living letter written by God himself, read by those who have lost their way, reminding them that miracles are still possible for those who dare to trust. God works in circles, not lines. His blessings ripple outward, touching people you may never meet. A word you speak, a story you share, or a prayer you whisper may awaken faith in someone standing at the edge of despair. You may never know the full reach of your obedience, but heaven does. Every miracle carries a mission, not to boast of what was done, but to reveal who did it. When you tell your story, You are not recounting your strength. You are releasing His glory. You see, miracles were never meant to be trophies. They are torches, meant to light the path for others still walking through the dark. When God lifted you out of that valley, it wasn't so you could simply stand on the mountain and admire the view. It was so you could call down to those still climbing, "Don't give up. I've seen what waits at the top." Your scars, once symbols of pain, become landmarks of grace. What once made you ashamed now becomes your testimony. The very thing that broke you becomes the key that unlocks healing in someone else. Think of how Jesus fed the 5,000. He did not create bread and keep it in His hands. He blessed it, broke it, and then passed it on. The blessing multiplied in the breaking. So it is with you. The miracle multiplies when you share it. The impossible expands when you speak of it. Silence locks the blessing inside you, but testimony releases it into the world. When you open your mouth and tell others what God has done, faith begins to breathe again in the hearts of those who thought hope was gone. Sometimes we want to hide our pain once the miracle arrives. We want to pretend we were never desperate, never weak, never on the edge of giving up. But the world doesn't need your perfection. It needs your authenticity. It needs to know that faith isn't clean and easy, but raw and real. That you wrestled with doubt, you cried through nights of silence, and yet you still believed. Your vulnerability becomes the doorway through which others find courage. Your honesty becomes the bridge between their despair and God's deliverance. And here lies a divine secret. God never wastes a healed wound. Every scar you carry has purpose. He will use your story in places you least expect. A quiet conversation, a broken stranger, a hurting friend who says, "I can't go on." And your words, born from experience, will carry authority because they come from truth. You won't need eloquence. Your presence will speak for you. The same Spirit that once strengthened you will flow through you, comforting others with the comfort you once received. When God uses you to do the impossible, you become part of a chain of grace stretching through time. Someone's faith once opened a door for you, and now your faith opens a door for someone else. The miracle that began in your life is meant to continue, not as a memory, but as a movement. It's not just a story of what God did, it's proof of what He is still doing. So never underestimate the reach of your obedience or the power of your testimony. You are not a final destination, you are a channel. The water that refreshed you is meant to flow forward into the lives of the thirsty. The healing that restored you is meant to overflow into the broken. The grace that found you is meant to find others through you. Because when God does the impossible, He does not just write your story. He writes countless others through you, and the miracle you carry will echo beyond your lifetime, whispering into generations yet to come, "Look what God can do with a willing heart." The greatest proof that God has used you for the impossible is peace, not applause, not recognition, not even the visible evidence of success, but that quiet, holy stillness that settles deep within the soul when you finally understand that it was never you who carried the weight, it was always Him. The world may marvel at the miracle, but heaven measures your transformation by your peace. That is the truest sign that divine hands have touched your life, when your spirit can rest, even in the presence of uncertainty. Peace is not born from the absence of storms. It is born from the awareness that the storm no longer owns you. Before God used you, your heart may have been restless, striving, proving, fearing, doubting. You may have chased validation, mistaking noise for purpose, but once God has done the impossible through you, something changes forever. The noise fades. The striving ceases. You no longer need to convince the world that you are chosen, because your spirit already knows. The battle that once drains you now becomes the ground upon which peace is planted. This peace is not shallow. It is not the temporary calm that the world offers, the kind that lasts only until the next problem appears. It is a peace that surpasses understanding, because it is not built on circumstances. It is rooted in the revelation that God was faithful all along. You have seen his power with your own eyes. You have walked through the impossible and come out whole. The same heart that once broke beneath the weight of uncertainty now beats with quiet strength, knowing that whatever comes next, the same God who brought you through before will do it again. You see, true peace is not an emotion, it is evidence. It is the soul's testimony that the battle is already won, even before the next begins. It's the unspoken assurance that nothing, not fear, not failure, not loss, can shake what has been established between you and God. When you have truly seen his hand at work, anxiety loses its grip. You begin to live from a higher place, walking not by sight but by memory. The memory of how he sustained you when everything was falling apart. The world cannot understand this peace. To others you may seem detached or unbothered. They may wonder how you remain calm when life throws its worst at you. But they cannot see the covenant written inside you, the silent promise between Creator and creation that says, "I am with you always." Peace becomes your proof, the quiet halo of the miraculous. It tells the story without words. It whispers to those who watch your life, God did this. Peace is the harvest of trust. When you finally stop fighting for control and start resting in faith, the heart finds its rhythm again. You no longer wrestle with the how or the when. You simply know that he will. This is the kind of peace that allowed Daniel to sleep in a den of lions, that kept Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego calm in the flames, that steadied David before Goliath. Their circumstances didn't change before the miracle, their peace did. Peace was not the reward, it was the weapon. It was the visible sign of invisible faith. And when you have walked through the impossible, this peace becomes your most sacred possession. It is no longer dependent on what happens to you, because it flows from what God has already done within you. The same voice that once said, "Be still and know that I am God," now echoes inside your being. You no longer need explanations. You no longer seek control. You live in divine rhythm, resting where others panic, believing where others doubt, and standing where others fall. This is the peace that changes how you move through the world. You stop rushing toward outcomes and begin walking in trust. You stop reacting to chaos and start radiating calm. You no longer chase miracles, you carry them. Because once God has used you for the impossible, you understand that peace itself is the greatest miracle of all. And so when the applause fades, when the noise quiets, and when no one remembers the details of your story, you will still have peace. It will sit beside you like an old friend, reminding you that you walked with God, that he took your weakness and made it his strength, that he turned your battle into beauty. And in that sacred stillness, you will realize the greatest proof that the impossible happened is not what others see, it's what you feel when all is silent. A peace that cannot be shaken, a calm that cannot be explained, a soul forever anchored in the truth that God did it. When all is said and done, and the dust of your journey settles, you will look back and understand none of it was random. Every delay, every disappointment, every sleepless night was a piece of a divine design. You will see that the impossible was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to reveal who you truly are when touched by the hand of God. And the path you once walked in trembling will one day glow with the light of testimony, and the tears you once hid in silence will shine like pearls of purpose. The miracle was not just that the mountain moved, but that your heart learned to trust while it still stood in your way. You became something heaven could use, pliable, humble, ready. The impossible did not make you bitter, it made you eternal. You discovered that the greatest power on earth is not the ability to command storms, but to find peace within them. You learned that miracles are not always loud. Sometimes they come softly, in the stillness of surrender. Those who see you now may call it luck or fate, but you will know the truth. You were chosen, refined, and set apart for something greater. You were used as proof that God still writes wonders into human stories, that He still chooses unlikely vessels to display His glory. And your life, yes, your life, became the stage upon which the divine performed what no man could ever do. The world measures success by what you achieve. Heaven measures it by what you become. You were not just blessed, you were changed. You were not just delivered, you were transformed. The miracle may fade from memory, but the peace remains. That peace is your covenant, a silent testimony that God did the impossible through you. So walk forward, not with pride, but with reverence, not with fear, but with faith. For you have seen what only faith can see, that when you reach the end of yourself, you have only reached the beginning of God. And every time the world says, "It cannot be done," your soul will smile in remembrance, for it will know what heaven whispered long ago. With God, nothing is impossible.